Hi, so I'd like to talk to you today a little bit about how you might join strips, possibly for a binding, but how you do a diagonal join. They might be wider strips for a border where you would rather have a diagonal join than just a straight on join. But I'm just using some 2.5-inch strips today, which is a fairly common size for bindings, for doing that double fold binding. So in order to get a diagonal join, there's a couple of reasons for doing diagonal joins. Quite often a diagonal join will help things sit flatter because it's not rolling over, particularly in a binding where you're folding a binding over and then over again. If you just had a straight seam, you'd probably have a little bump where the join was. If we do it on the diagonal, it's spread across so that when that was folded, your diagonal is spreading itself across so that it's not causing great lumps and bumps in your work. And the same thing can be with a border. You might want to join the border diagonally because you feel that it looks better with the fabric melding edges together than a straight line, or any number of things, or just because you just want to do diagonal joins. So today we're just doing some diagonal joins. So I'll show you how you can do that. So I've just got some strips. These are full width of fabric, so they've still got their selvages on, and I'm just going to lay this just to work out where that diagonal actually is. Normally I would trim my selvages off, well, I will be trimming them off, but I don't necessarily trim them off before I do my joins. So I've got my strips, I'm going to put them right sides together. So I've laid this one so that it's straight with the lines on the board, and I've got a line coming down here, and I'm going to lay this one at right angles, so across it, and again I'm going to line it up so that it's straight with some lines on the board. So we're looking pretty good so far, but we need to know we're going to sew across this diagonal here. We need to mark it, so we could draw a line, and so where they intersect, top and bottom there, that's going to be your diagonal. So you could draw the line and you're going to be stitching on that line. If you didn't want to draw a line, you could do a finger press line. So the same thing where that intersects, if you bring this fold so it's sitting nicely, everything's sitting straight, if you bring that over so that the fold to that point there, and it's lined up with that little edge there and that point up there, you could just do a little finger press line in there, and that would be your sewing line. So there's a couple of options. That's finger pressed exactly where I've drawn it, so it's the same thing. You may want to pop a little pin in or something just to hold that in place as you take it to the sewing machine. And then, so I'm going to go to the sewing machine and do that and show you the next little step. So I'm sewing on that line, so keeping things nice and flat so that that is a diagonal line. Stitch right along the line. And so if you've got lots of seams, if you're making a long binding and you need to join up, you know, half a dozen strips or something, you could have them ready and chain piece them in if you wanted to, or just do them one at a time. And so I'm using two colours so that you'll be able to clearly see the diagonal. So now I want to trim off that corner. So this is going to take away my selvages at the same time. So that's why I didn't do that earlier. You don't want to leave selvages on fabric just as a matter of interest, because quite often there's a slightly heavier thread along the very edge of the selvage, and that can cause problems with shrinkage or various other things when you're doing sewing. So I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch away. I want to cut these corners off, so I'm going to lay my 1/4 inch line right over my sewing line and cut 1/4 inch away from the actual stitching. And I don't need that, and now I'm going to press that. Now you could just press it one way, but again you're going to get a little bit of a bump. If this was for a binding, I would press these seams open because it just sits better, it's flatter. So here I am, I'm going to press those open, and that's all looking pretty good. So diagonal seams are stretchy, so you do have to be a little bit aware of that when you're sewing things, pressing things. When anything that you sew that's diagonal is going to be stretchy. It's what's called the bias of the fabric, and it's not helpful sometimes because it stretches and moves. So now you've got some little rabbit ears. I probably would just trim those off just so that I've got nice straight edges, and there I've got a very nice diagonal join in my fabric, which I think you can see quite clearly. So there's a couple of other uses for diagonal seams other than binding. I'll show you one where I've done it in a binding where I joined up all scrappy colours. This is a large quilt, so I won't open the whole quilt out. This is my daily dot. but I think you can probably see here that along these edges I've got lots of different colours happening along my edges, and they've got that diagonal join in them, so that it can be quite decorative, like because I've specifically gone for short lengths, I wanted the colours to change, so you can make a very nice looking edge with those little diagonal seams. So another thing to be aware of when you're doing the diagonal seams is the direction of the diagonal. There may be times, this one is going very nicely this way, where you actually want it to go the other way. So you need to just then lay your fabric out the other way. So I think that's something that you can work out once you know how to do that. And a time when you might want to do that would be, this is a quilt pattern that I've done. I haven't quilted it yet. Sewn together beautifully by Catherine for me. And so what has happened here is that this is the same thing. We started with strips of some background, strips of the colours, and we've done diagonal joins. And then we've changed direction. So we've just had to put the rectangle or the strip out the other direction so that you get the diagonal going one way or you get the diagonal going the other way. I think you know what I mean. Keep an eye on which way your diagonals are going. But if you're just trying to do the pattern's called popping along, just so you know, for the quilt. So if you're not too sure about that, have a little practice, press your seams open. If you want your diagonal to go the other way, put your fabric out in the opposite direction and it will go the other way. So I think that's it for diagonal seams. Keep an eye on the stretch on them, that they don't stretch when you're sewing them, and that's the beauty of doing things before you trim off all the corner rather than cutting a diagonal line first. If you had a cut edge, that would be much more likely to stretch than when it's a full piece that you sew diagonally, and then you can trim it away afterwards. So that's it for diagonal joins. Thank you.